"You don't hide pain well," the Apache woman said, and the cowboy went completely still. The sun hung low in the sky, spilling gold and orange across the dusty town. A small cluster of buildings stood on the edge of the plains, their wooden walls worn from years of wind and sun. The town was quiet, almost too quiet except for the creak of a sign swinging outside the trading post. Inside, the air smelled of dry grain, leather, and smoke from the hearth at the back. It was the kind of place where people didn't talk much unless they had to, and even then, their words were short, careful. The cowboy stepped off his horse with slow, measured movements. His boots sank slightly into the soft dust as he walked toward the post. He carried a rifle slung across his back and a satchel that had seen better days. His hat was pulled low over his eyes, hiding as much of his face as it could, but it wasn't enough. People in towns like this learn to read the lines in a person's shoulders, the tension in their hands, and the quiet weight they carried. He pushed the door open, the little bell above jingling softly. A cloud of dust rose from the floorboards, and caught in the shafts of sunlight that streamed through the windows. He took a slow look around. The shelves were stocked with the usual supplies: dried meats, flour, sacks of beans, and a few jars of pickled vegetables. Behind the counter, a woman swept, her movements precise and quiet. The cowboy's hand itched to rest on his rifle, but he forced himself to keep it at his side. His body carried the story of long days in the sun, of nights spent in the cold under open skies, and of fights that left more than just scars on his skin. He moved toward the counter, keeping his head low. He wanted only water and a moment to rest, but the town, small as it was, had eyes everywhere. That was when he noticed her. She stood near the back of the store, her gaze calm but piercing. The Apache woman was tall and steady, her posture proud. Her hair was long and dark, falling over her shoulders in a simple braid. There was a quiet confidence in the way she looked at the world, as if she had seen much and carried none of it lightly. When her eyes met his, it felt like a current passing between them, an acknowledgement that she saw him, all of him, even the parts he tried to hide. "You don't hide pain well," she said quietly, without turning her head, as if speaking to herself, but knowing he could hear. The words hit the cowboy like a sudden gust of cold wind. He froze, caught off guard, his fingers tightening around the strap of his satchel. He had spent years learning to mask his feelings, to hide the aches in his heart and the guilt that weighed him down. He was good at it, or at least he thought he was. But this woman, standing there in simple confidence, had seen right through him. For a moment, he said nothing. He simply stared, trying to measure her, to understand if she had noticed more than just the surface. But her expression was calm, unjudging, and that only made it harder to look away. It was the kind of gaze that demanded honesty, the kind that made him question why he carried so much alone. Finally, he nodded slightly, a small acknowledgement that he had heard her. "I reckon not many notice," he said, his voice low and rough from disuse. She tilted her head just a fraction, the faintest smile tugging at the corner of her lips. "Not many look closely," she replied. Her words were soft, but they carried weight. But the eyes always tell the story if you're willing to see. The cowboy shifted on his feet, uncomfortable with the attention. He wasn't used to people who saw past the surface. Most townsfolk only cared about what he could buy or sell, or the rumors they could spread. But this woman, she seemed to read him like an open book, and that made him uneasy in a way he hadn't felt in years. He moved toward the counter, hoping to divert the conversation. "Just need some water," he said, forcing his tone casual. His hand hovered over a glass, and he drank slowly, letting the cool liquid settle the dry ache in his throat. But even as he drank, he felt the weight of her gaze. "You're not from around here," she said suddenly, stepping closer, her voice carrying a quiet certainty. He paused, considering how much to say. "Just passing through," he replied finally. Simple. True. But there was more behind the words than he could admit. Passing through was easier than staying, easier than facing the past he carried like a shadow. She didn't press him further. Instead, she glanced toward the window where the sun was sinking, painting the sky in streaks of red and purple. "The land changes people," she said softly, "and people change, even when the land doesn't seem to notice." Her words hung in the air like smoke. The cowboy thought of long nights under the stars, of friends lost and mistakes made. He had traveled far to escape something he didn't even fully understand himself. And here was a stranger, quietly, gently reminding him that no matter how far he ran, the past was still there, quietly waiting. He wanted to look away, to shrug it off, but something in her presence held him in place. She wasn't demanding answers or explanations. She wasn't judging. She was simply there, steady and unyielding, offering a reflection of what he had been trying to hide. The small bell jingled again as the door opened behind him. Another traveler, perhaps, or a merchant from the next town. The moment broke, and he moved slightly, clearing his throat. "I should be going," he said, though he didn't move toward the door yet. She watched him with that same calm gaze, as if measuring something beyond his words. "Pain doesn't always go away when you leave a place," she said. "It follows until you face it." The cowboy's jaw tightened. Her words weren't cruel. They were honest, and honesty had a way of cutting deeper than any fight or wound. He turned toward the door, forcing himself to nod again, a gesture of understanding he wasn't sure he fully felt yet. Outside, the sun had dropped lower, and the shadows of the building stretched long across the dust. His horse shifted under the saddle, and he swung up slowly, feeling the familiar weight of leather and steel against his body. But the calm certainty of the Apache woman lingered in his mind, like the echo of a voice in an empty canyon. He rode slowly out of the town, the wheels of the wagon tracks in the dirt still warm from the day. His thoughts were restless, not from the road or the sun, but from the encounter that had shaken something deep inside him. He had spent years hiding pain behind silence and distance, but someone had seen through it, someone he hadn't expected. The wind blew across the plains, carrying dust and the scent of dry grass. He pulled his hat lower against the glare and let the horse find its rhythm. Yet, for the first time in a long while, he thought about stopping, about letting someone in, even just a little. The words she had spoken, soft as they were, had left a mark. "You don't hide pain well," she had said. The memory of her calm voice replayed in his mind, a quiet challenge he couldn't ignore, and for the first time in years he felt a flicker of something he had thought lost, awareness, and maybe, just maybe, hope. The cowboy rode on through the open plains, the ground hard beneath his horse's hooves. The wind was cooler now, carrying the faint smell of sage and dry earth. The sun had disappeared behind distant hills, leaving the sky streaked with pale purples and deep oranges. For a long while he rode in silence, his mind drifting back to the words the Apache woman had spoken. "You don't hide pain well." They echoed in his thoughts, turning over and over like stones in a stream. He had spent years convincing himself that the only way to survive was to carry his burdens alone. To show weakness was to invite trouble, and he had learned that lesson early. His father had told him, when he was barely old enough to ride a horse, that a man's strength was measured by what he endured quietly. And so he had endured, hiding every ache, every loss, and every regret behind a stoic face and careful movements. But the woman had seen through it. That simple, calm statement had unsettled him in ways that no danger or hardship ever had. He remembered the way she had looked at him, steady and unwavering, as if she knew him better than he knew himself. That gaze was heavier than any rifle or blade he had ever faced. It weighed on him because it was true. As he rode, his thoughts wandered back further, to the events that had shaped him. He had grown up in a small town far to the east, a place where the winters were harsh and the summers were short. His family had been simple folk, his father a blacksmith and his mother a quiet woman who kept the home. He had loved them fiercely, but life had never been easy. Work was hard, food sometimes scarce, and danger always near. Yet it was the people he had lost that left the deepest scars. He remembered the night his friend and partner, a man named Jed, had fallen in a fight they hadn't planned for. They had been hired to guide a wagon through rough territory, and a band of outlaws had ambushed them. The cowboy had been the only one to survive. The memory haunted him still, the sound of gunfire, Jed calling his name, the helplessness that had settled over him like a heavy cloak. He had managed to escape, but the guilt had never left him, and for years afterward he had ridden from town to town, never staying in one place for long. Each new settlement brought new faces, new work, and new reasons to keep moving. But the memory of Jed's death followed him, a shadow he could not shake. It was the reason he avoided friendships, avoided attachments, and avoided letting anyone see the cracks beneath his rough exterior. Pain, he had told himself, was something to bear alone. Yet, now as he thought of the Apache woman, he realized how lonely that path had made him. She had not judged him or tried to force him to talk, but her words had made him confront the truth he had buried deep inside. Pain could not be hidden forever, and perhaps it did not have to be hidden at all. The plains stretched endlessly, the horizon soft and blurred by the evening light. He spurred his horse gently, feeling the rhythm of its gait and the familiar connection between rider and animal. It had been a long time since he had felt anything close to peace, but there was a strange comfort in the movement, in the solitude that was neither empty nor oppressive. Suddenly, he noticed smoke rising in the distance. It was faint, curling into the sky like a ribbon, but it drew his attention immediately. Instinct told him to approach cautiously. Travelers in these parts had learned to be wary. Smoke could mean a camp, a fire, or trouble. He guided his horse slowly, keeping low, scanning the land as he approached. As he neared, he saw the camp. A small fire burned in the center, with a few bundles of belongings stacked neatly nearby. The Apache woman was there, tending the fire with practiced hands. She glanced up and saw him approaching. Instead of surprise, there was a calm acknowledgement, as if she had expected him to follow. "You're quiet," she said simply, without looking up from her work. He dismounted and tied his horse to a nearby post. "Always have been," he replied, trying to keep his voice steady. She studied him for a moment, her eyes like dark pools that reflected the fading light. "You carry more than you should," she said softly. "It makes you slow, careful, even when you don't realize it." Her words hit again, not harshly, but with precision. He felt the weight of truth pressing on him, reminding him of every choice he had made to shield himself, every emotion he had buried under layers of stoicism. He sank to the ground near the fire, letting the warmth touch his face. The smell of burning wood mixed with the faint scent of sage she had gathered. "I've seen a lot," he admitted quietly. Things I wish I hadn't. She nodded without judgment, her hands moving deftly to add another piece of wood to the fire. We all carry things we wish we hadn't seen, she said. The difference is in how we let them shape us. Some let them weigh too heavy. Others learn from them. He looked into the fire, seeing his own reflection in the flickering flames. Memories came unbidden. The night Jed had fallen, the harsh winters of his youth, the faces of townsfolk who had judged him for staying silent. The weight of all of it pressed down on him. Yet, for the first time in a long while, he did not feel the need to hide it. She wasn't forcing him to speak, but her presence made it possible to begin untangling the knots in his heart. The woman sat across from him, pulling her knees close and letting her gaze rest on the flames. You don't have to speak to me, she said gently. But I can see the story in your eyes. And sometimes, seeing it out loud makes it easier to carry. He swallowed hard, unsure if he wanted to continue, yet a small part of him did. I lost someone, he began, his voice trembling slightly. A friend. We were hired to guide a wagon. There were outlaws. I was the only one left. Her expression softened, though her eyes remained steady. You carry that guilt, she said. It's heavy. But you survived, which means you have a chance to honor him, not by hiding, but by living. He looked away, focusing on the fire, on the small sparks that rose and vanished into the night sky. I've tried to live, he admitted. But it's been lonely. I keep moving, hoping distance will make it easier. She smiled faintly, almost imperceptibly. Distance doesn't heal everything. Sometimes you have to stop running long enough to face it, to let someone see it, and still remain standing. The cowboy felt a warmth that had nothing to do with the fire. It was strange, unfamiliar, and a little frightening. He'd spent so long believing that solitude was safety, but now he wondered if there could be strength in connection, even with someone he had just met. For a long while they sat in silence, the only sound the crackling of the fire and the gentle night wind brushing against the grass. Slowly the cowboy began to speak more, sharing details of the journey he had taken since Jed's death. He spoke of towns he had passed, of people he had helped in small ways, of nights under the stars that had felt endless and empty. She listened without interruption, her calm presence giving him the courage to continue. As the night deepened, he realized he had shared more than he had with anyone in years. He did not feel shame or fear as he spoke, only a strange relief. The woman had not judged him, nor had she pushed him too far. She had simply seen him, and in that seeing, he had found a measure of peace. When he finally fell silent, the fire had burned low, casting long shadows across the ground. She reached out and placed a hand near the flames, her fingers warming slightly. Pain doesn't disappear when you speak it, she said softly, but it becomes lighter when it is known, even if only by one person. The cowboy nodded slowly. Her words were simple, yet they carried a weight he understood deeply. For the first time, he felt a flicker of hope, a fragile thing, but real. He realized that perhaps facing the past, instead of hiding from it, was not weakness, but courage. That night, as they settled beside the dying fire, the cowboy felt something he had not felt in a long time. The quiet knowledge that he was not entirely alone. The Apache woman had not promised him answers, nor had she offered easy solutions. She had simply seen him and that was enough to start the journey toward healing. And as he drifted into a light, uneasy sleep under the open sky, he understood something profound. Pain was part of life, yes, but it did not have to define him. And sometimes the most unexpected people could offer the guidance needed to face what had been hidden for so long. The next morning, the cowboy woke to the soft light of dawn spilling across the plains. The fire from last night had burned to embers, and the air was crisp and cool. The Apache woman was already awake, gathering the last pieces of their small camp. She moved with quiet efficiency, her eyes scanning the horizon as if she could read the land itself. The cowboy watched her for a moment, feeling an unusual sense of comfort in her calm presence. He swung his legs over his horse and approached her, adjusting the saddle and ropes. "Where are you heading?" he asked, keeping his voice low. She glanced at him briefly, then toward the distant hills. "There's a creek about 10 miles north. The water is good, and the land there will give us cover for the day," she said simply. The cowboy nodded. He trusted her judgment, though he did not fully understand why. There was something in her quiet confidence, a steadiness that made him feel less alone for the first time in years. He mounted his horse, feeling the familiar rhythm beneath him, and fell into step beside her. The journey began in silence, the only sound the soft clop of horse hooves against the dry earth. The plains stretched endlessly, golden grasses bending in the morning breeze. The cowboy's thoughts wandered to last night's conversation, and he realized he had spoken more openly than he ever had in years. It was strange to share such things with a stranger, yet he did not feel fear or regret. He had always thought that keeping pain inside was strength, but perhaps strength came from facing it. After a few miles, she spoke again, her voice calm and steady. "You have been carrying your grief alone for too long," she said. "It shapes you, but it does not have to define you." He kept his eyes on the ground ahead, feeling the truth of her words. "I've lived with it so long I don't know any other way," he admitted. "I'm afraid if I let it out, I'll fall apart." She shook her head gently. "The heart does not break because it is seen. It breaks because it is ignored, buried, and hidden. You will not fall apart if you face it. You will find strength in the honesty of it." He looked at her, studying the lines of her face, the quiet determination in her gaze. There was something reassuring in the way she spoke, something that made him believe her. He nodded slowly, though he said nothing, allowing her words to sink in. As the morning grew warmer, they passed through a shallow valley where wildflowers dotted the ground. The cowboy noticed birds flitting among the bushes, and for a moment he felt a small sense of peace. It had been a long time since he had noticed beauty in the world, without distraction or worry. Her presence, quiet and steady, allowed him to see things he had long ignored. They stopped by a small ridge to rest and check their horses. She led her horse to a stream, letting it drink, while he followed suit. The water was cold and clear, running over smooth stones, and he knelt to drink from it himself. The simple act of pausing, of being present in the moment, felt strange but comforting. "You move carefully," she said, watching him. "It is not only your horse you are mindful of, but yourself." He nodded, letting out a slow breath. "Careful is better than reckless," he said quietly. "I've learned that the hard way." She smiled faintly. "Experience teaches, but wisdom listens. You have both, if you are willing to pay attention." The cowboy did not answer immediately. He thought about the years of running, the mistakes and the losses. Perhaps she was right. Perhaps it was time to stop letting fear and guilt control every step. As they continued, the land changed. The dry plains gave way to scattered trees, and the sound of rustling leaves replaced the wind's whistle. They followed a faint path that led to a small clearing where the creek ran. The water sparkled in the sunlight, and the shade of the trees offered relief from the heat. It was a perfect spot to rest and plan the next part of the journey. The cowboy dismounted, tying his horse to a sturdy tree. The Apache woman did the same. Together they worked to set up a small camp, gathering firewood and arranging their supplies. The cowboy found himself talking more, describing towns he had passed, work he had done, and small acts of kindness he had tried to offer along the way. She listened, never interrupting, never judging, only allowing him to share at his own pace. "You help others quietly," she observed. "Not for recognition, but because it feels right." He shrugged, feeling a small warmth in his chest. "It's the only way I know to keep moving forward," he said. "If I don't, I get stuck in the past." She nodded knowingly. "And the past is heavy, but kindness is a way to lighten the burden, both for you and for others." They spent the afternoon near the creek, allowing the horses to graze while they rested in the shade. The cowboy watched the water flow, noticing the small fish and insects, the way the sunlight danced on the ripples. He realized he had not paid attention to such things in years. It was strange how her presence seemed to make the world sharper, more vivid, and more alive. When he finally spoke again, it was quieter, almost a whisper. "I never thought I'd meet someone like you," he said. She looked at him with a steady gaze, her expression calm. "Why not?" she asked simply. He hesitated. "I've always been alone," he admitted. "I've learned not to trust, not to rely on anyone. People leave, die, or disappoint. It's safer this way." She considered his words for a moment, then replied, "It is safer, yes, but safer is not always better. Trust is not a weakness. It is a bridge." He was silent, thinking of the many years he had spent behind walls of silence and caution. Her words were unfamiliar, but not unwelcome. Perhaps she was right. Perhaps there was a way to face life without hiding completely. As evening approached, they prepared another small fire. The sun dipped below the horizon, painting the sky in shades of red, purple, and gold. Shadows stretched across the ground, and the air grew cooler. The cowboy felt a strange sense of contentment he had not felt in years. Sitting beside the fire, he realized that he was not just surviving anymore. He was beginning to live again. The Apache woman tended the fire, adding small pieces of wood and watching the flames. "Ah, you have a story," she said softly, "and it is not finished. It is still being written, and you have the chance to shape the ending." He looked into the fire, thinking of Jed, of the towns he had passed, and of the years of solitude. "I hope so," he said quietly. "I hope I can make things right in some way." "You can," she said firmly. "Not by forgetting, not by hiding, but by facing it. Each step forward, each choice, each act of kindness, these are the ways to honor the past and shape the future." The cowboy nodded, feeling the weight of her words settle in his chest. He realized that he had spent so long fearing connection and facing pain that he had missed many small joys along the way. But now, walking beside someone who saw him without judgment, he felt the possibility of something more, a chance to move forward without the heavy chains of guilt and fear. Night fully fell, and the stars appeared bright and countless in the clear sky. The cowboy lay back on the ground, looking up, feeling the vastness of the world around him. The Apache woman lay nearby, silent, steady, a comforting presence. For the first time in a long while, he felt a quiet sense of hope. The journey ahead was uncertain. There would be challenges, dangers, and difficult choices, but he did not feel the old fear as sharply anymore. He had someone beside him, and for the first time in years, he believed that he could face what was coming. As the fire crackled and the night grew deeper, he drifted into a light sleep, comforted by the presence of the woman who had quietly guided him to this moment. He understood something he had never truly realized before. Strength was not in hiding pain, nor in carrying it alone. Strength was in facing it, in sharing it, and in finding the courage to continue despite it. And so, under the vast expanse of the night sky, with the fire casting dancing shadows across the ground, the cowboy took the first steps toward a future he had not dared to imagine, a future where he was not alone, and where the journey itself held lessons, healing, and perhaps even peace. The morning sun had barely touched the horizon when the cowboy awoke to the sound of wind whispering through the trees. The air was cooler now, carrying a faint scent of wet earth and wild grass from the nearby creek. The Apache woman was already up, quietly tending the fire. She moved with her usual calm precision, gathering small pieces of kindling and arranging them carefully to catch the morning flame. The cowboy watched her for a moment, feeling an odd sense of peace in the routine, as though her presence made the world feel steadier and safer. They packed up camp silently, each movement deliberate and careful. The horses, now rested, stretched their legs and neighed softly as the two travelers prepared to continue. The cowboy tightened the straps on his saddle and adjusted the rifle across his back. Though he had long learned to carry his burdens alone, the woman's presence made the journey feel less heavy. He had come to rely on her quiet wisdom, even if he would never say it aloud. Their path took them into a narrow valley where the land rose steeply on either side. The plains had ended, replaced by rugged terrain filled with jagged rocks and scattered trees. The trail was faint, marked only by the occasional hoofprint or the worn path of travelers long past. As they moved deeper into the valley, the wind became sharper, slicing across the canyon with a steady hum. The cowboy kept his senses alert, scanning the surroundings, every rustle of leaves or distant bird call making him pause. "That way," the Apache woman said softly, pointing to a small incline. "The path becomes less obvious, but it will lead us to the higher ground. From there, we can see the land for miles." He nodded, following her lead. As they climbed, the trail narrowed, forcing them to walk single file. The rocks underfoot were loose and uneven, and the horses struggled to maintain steady footing. At one point, the cowboy slipped slightly, his boot catching on a jagged stone. He caught himself quickly, feeling the familiar surge of adrenaline that always followed small slips in the wilderness. "Steady," she said, her voice calm but firm. "The land tests those who travel through it. One wrong step can make the difference between safety and injury." He adjusted his stance and continued, appreciating her guidance. Her presence was not controlling, but it offered reassurance. It reminded him that there was a way to face danger with caution, without surrendering to fear. As the morning wore on, the valley opened into a broader space, a plateau overlooking the surrounding hills. The view was breathtaking. The plains stretched far in the distance, golden and endless, while the nearby hills cast long shadows in the morning light. For a moment, the cowboy allowed himself to take in the beauty, the wind tugging at his coat and hat, the horses grazing calmly nearby. But the quiet did not last. A sudden movement in the distance caught his eye. A group of figures approaching quickly from the far end of the plateau. They were mounted, moving in a way that suggested purpose and urgency. The cowboy's hand instinctively went to the rifle, and he motioned to the Apache woman. "They're coming this way," he said quietly, keeping his voice low. "We need to be ready." She nodded, her calm eyes scanning the terrain. "Stay close," she said. "We can use the rocks for cover. Move quietly." They guided their horses behind a large boulder, crouching low. The figures were too far to hear their words, but their intent was clear. The cowboy felt a tension in his chest, the old familiar surge of fear and anticipation. Yet, he did not feel alone this time. He had someone beside him who saw clearly and understood the land, someone who remained steady even as danger approached. The group of riders drew closer, and it became apparent that they were not friendly travelers. The cowboy studied their movements, rough clothing, faces hidden beneath hats, and a sense of urgency that suggested trouble. He tightened his grip on the rifle, trying to steady his heartbeat. The Apache woman leaned close, her voice barely above a whisper. "We can pass them safely if we wait for the right moment. Do not act hastily. Let them move closer, then follow my lead." He nodded, trusting her judgment. Years of solitary travel had taught him caution, but her presence gave him a new perspective. He realized that there was strength in patience and in working together. Minutes passed, each one stretching longer than the last. The figures drew nearer, and the cowboy could see the tension in their posture, the way they scanned the plateau for movement. One misstep, one wrong motion, and the situation could become dangerous. Then she acted. The Apache woman signaled quietly, guiding the cowboy and their horses along a hidden path that curved around the edge of the plateau. They moved slowly, keeping low, letting the riders pass without noticing them. The cowboy marveled at her skill, the way she seemed to merge with the land itself, knowing its secrets and using them to their advantage. Once the danger had passed, they slowed, allowing the horses to catch their breath. The cowboy exhaled slowly, realizing how quickly his heart had been racing. "I didn't know we could get through it without being seen," he admitted, still in awe. She glanced at him, her expression calm. "The land has ways to protect those who pay attention. It teaches you if you are willing to listen." He nodded, feeling a mix of relief and admiration. For the first time in years, he realized that facing danger did not always mean confrontation. Sometimes, strength was in caution, in observation, and in trust. The rest of the day passed with quiet determination. They traveled through narrow canyons, over rocky ridges, and along hidden streams. The cowboy found himself relying on the Apache woman's guidance more than he had expected. Each decision, each careful movement, reminded him that he did not need to face the world entirely alone. By late afternoon, they reached a small clearing with a spring of fresh water. They allowed the horses to drink and graze while they rested. The cowboy sat on a rock, letting the warmth of the sun settle on his back. His mind wandered to the events of the morning, the tension, the fear, and the relief. He realized that he had felt alive in a way he had not for years, not from the threat itself, but from the shared experience, the trust that had allowed them to move safely together. "You handled yourself well," the Apache woman said softly, breaking the silence. "You have courage, but also patience. Both are needed." He looked at her, feeling a warmth he could not name. "I had help," he admitted. "I wouldn't have known the way to move without you." She smiled faintly, not boastfully, but with quiet acknowledgement. "Help is not weakness," she said. "It is a way to survive, to live." The cowboy nodded, realizing the truth of her words. He had spent years believing that solitude was the only path to safety, but he was beginning to see that trust and cooperation could be just as powerful. As evening approached, they set up a small camp near the spring. The Apache woman gathered firewood while the cowboy tended to the horses. The sun dipped below the horizon, painting the sky in shades of pink and gold. The air grew cooler, and the sounds of the wild began to emerge, the distant calls of birds, the rustle of small animals, and the soft whisper of the wind through the trees. They sat by the fire together, sharing a simple meal. The cowboy found himself talking more, describing towns they had passed, memories of friends, and small lessons he had learned along the way. The Apache woman listened without interruption, her calm presence allowing him to speak freely. "You are learning," she said finally, her eyes reflecting the firelight. "Not just about the land, but about yourself. Each step, each choice, each challenge teaches you something." He looked into the flames, feeling the weight of the day settle into his muscles and mind. "I've learned that danger isn't always what it seems," he said softly. "Sometimes it's what you do together that matters more than what you face alone." She nodded, her expression steady. "And that is the beginning of true courage, facing fear with wisdom and companionship. Not recklessness, but careful, deliberate strength." Night fell fully and the stars appeared, countless and bright above them. The cowboy lay back watching the sky, feeling a sense of calm he had not known in years. He realized that the events of the day had taught him more than any town or battle ever had: courage, patience, and trust. These were lessons that he would carry with him forever. And as the fire crackled and the night deepened, he understood something profound. The journey was not just about reaching a destination. It was about learning to face life honestly, with courage, and with someone who could see the truth of you without judgment. He had begun to understand that strength came not only from survival, but from connection and trust. For the first time in a long while, he felt ready for whatever lay ahead. He knew the challenges would not end, but he no longer feared them alone. With the Apache woman beside him, guiding, teaching, and walking steadily, he felt a quiet confidence in himself and in the journey yet to come. The first light of dawn crept over the hills, painting the sky in soft shades of pink and gold. The cowboy stirred, feeling the warmth of the fire fading with the night. The Apache woman had already risen, quietly preparing the small camp as the horses shifted beneath their saddles. He watched her, noticing the calm precision in her movements, the way she seemed to belong to the land itself. For a moment he felt a quiet sense of gratitude, not just for her guidance, but for the lessons she had helped him discover about himself. They mounted their horses and continued their journey along a narrow trail that led through rolling hills. The sun rose higher, casting light on the grasses that swayed in the morning breeze. For the first time in years, the cowboy allowed himself to notice the beauty around him, the distant mountains, the birds rising into the sky, and the soft hum of life in the valley below. Traveling alone, he would have barely noticed these things. But with the Apache woman beside him, the world seemed sharper, more alive, and full of quiet wonder. "Where are we headed?" he asked, keeping his voice low. She did not answer immediately, her eyes scanning the horizon. "There is a settlement a few days from here," she said finally. "It is small, but the people there are kind. They will provide rest and supplies for the journey ahead." He nodded. He did not speak of the past, not yet. Words could not fully capture the weight he had carried for years, the guilt, the loss, the endless solitude, but he felt a strange comfort in the thought of reaching a place where the world was not entirely unknown, where he could rest without fear of judgment or surprise. The trail wound through a gentle valley shaded by scattered trees. The horses moved steadily, their hooves stirring the soft earth. As they rode, the cowboy reflected on how far he had come since the first morning he had encountered the Apache woman. He remembered the words she had spoken then, words that had struck him deeply. "You don't hide pain well." At first he had resisted their meaning, unwilling to face the truth behind them. He had thought strength was in silence, in carrying pain alone, in keeping the world at a distance. But over the course of the journey, he had discovered a new understanding. Courage was not in hiding, but in acknowledging, in facing the world with honesty, and in trusting those who could guide him without judgment. By midday, they reached a shallow stream that cut through the valley. The water was cool and clear, running over smooth stones. The horses drank and grazed as the two travelers rested beside the bank. The cowboy removed his hat and ran a hand through his hair, feeling the sun's warmth on his face. For the first time in years, he felt a sense of calm he could not name, a quiet peace that had nothing to do with solitude or survival. "You've learned much," the Apache woman said softly, her voice carrying over the gentle sound of water. He looked at her, noticing the way her eyes reflected the sunlight, steady and unwavering. I think I have," he said slowly. "I've learned that I don't have to carry everything alone, that I can face what's inside me without hiding from it, and that there is strength in trust." She nodded. The journey changes us, not because it is easy, but because it forces us to see ourselves clearly. Each step, each challenge, each moment of honesty shapes the person we become. He took a deep breath, letting her words settle. The weight he had carried for so long, the guilt over lost friends, the fear of vulnerability, the isolation he had chosen, felt lighter somehow. It had not vanished, and he knew it never would. But he no longer feared it as he once had. He had begun to understand that strength was not the absence of pain, but the courage to live with it, and to move forward despite it. They continued along the trail, the afternoon sun climbing high in the sky. The Apache woman led with quiet confidence, guiding them over rocky slopes and through shaded groves. The cowboy followed, alert but not anxious, his mind and body working in harmony with his horse and the land. He realized that the lessons he had learned on this journey were more valuable than any treasure or reward. Lessons about courage, patience, trust, and the quiet power of simply being present in the world. As evening approached, they found a gentle rise overlooking a wide valley. The sun was low, casting long shadows across the land and painting the sky in brilliant hues of red, orange, and purple. They stopped to rest, allowing the horses to graze. The cowboy dismounted and sat on a large rock, gazing at the horizon. For a long time, neither spoke, letting the beauty of the moment fill the quiet. Finally, he broke the silence. "I never thought I'd feel this way again," he admitted, his voice low. "Alive, I mean. Not just surviving, but alive." The Apache woman smiled faintly, a small curve of her lips that carried warmth without extravagance. "Life is not measured only by survival," she said. "It is measured by the moments we notice, by the courage we summon, and by the honesty we allow ourselves. You have learned to do all three." He nodded, feeling the truth of her words in his chest. He thought of Jed, of the towns he had passed, of the long years of solitude. He realized that, though the past could not be changed, the present was something he could shape. And, with the lessons he had learned, he could face the future with a steadier heart. Night fell slowly, and the stars appeared one by one, shining brightly in the clear sky. The cowboy and the Apache woman built a small fire, letting its warmth touch their faces. The horses grazed nearby, their presence a quiet reassurance. The cowboy leaned back, watching the flames dance and listening to the soft crackle of burning wood. "You have changed," the woman said softly. "Not in who you are, but in how you see yourself and the world. That is the true measure of the journey." He looked at her, feeling a surge of gratitude he could not fully express. "I thank you," he said simply, "for seeing me, for teaching me, even without trying to." She shook her head lightly, her eyes reflecting the firelight. "You saw yourself when you were ready. I only helped you notice it. The courage was always inside you." The cowboy considered her words, understanding them in a way he could finally accept. Courage, trust, and strength had always been within him, hidden beneath years of fear, guilt, and silence. The journey had not created these qualities. It had revealed them. As they settled for the night, the cowboy felt a quiet peace unlike any he had known. The fear of solitude had lessened, replaced by a sense of connection to the land, to life, and to the woman who had helped him see himself more clearly. He realized that journeys were not only about reaching a destination, but about the lessons learned and the growth achieved along the way. Before sleep claimed him, he looked up at the stars again, feeling the vastness of the world and the smallness of his own fears. He knew the future would bring more challenges, more moments of pain, and more difficult choices. But he also knew that he was no longer facing them alone, and he was no longer bound by the weight of the past. The Apache woman lay nearby, silent and steady, her presence a comforting reminder of the journey they had shared. He thought of the first morning he had seen her in the trading post, her simple words piercing through the walls he had built around himself. "You don't hide pain well." Those words had shaken him, yes, but they had also opened a door to understanding, courage, and connection. And now, as he drifted into sleep under the vast star-filled sky, he understood something profound. Life was not about hiding from pain or running from the past. It was about facing each day with honesty, with courage, and with the knowledge that trust and connection could make even the heaviest burdens easier to bear. The journey had changed him. He was still the cowboy who had survived the plains, the dangers, and the long years of solitude. But he was also a man who had learned to see clearly, to feel deeply, and to trust enough to share the road with another. And that, he realized, was the greatest strength of all. In the quiet of the night, the fire burning low, the horses resting nearby, and the stars shining above, the cowboy felt a sense of completion he had never known. The journey had not ended in triumph or riches, but in understanding, growth, and a quiet, steady hope. He had faced the truth of himself and discovered that he could move forward, stronger, wiser, and more alive than ever before. As dawn approached once again, he knew that the road would continue, that challenges and choices awaited. But he would meet them differently now. No longer alone, no longer hiding from pain, and no longer afraid of what he might find along the way. The lessons of the journey would stay with him, guiding each step, each decision, and each moment of life yet to come.